Om Utkramantam Stitim Vapim Bhunjanam Vimuda Nanupashanti Jnana Chakshushaha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The deluded do not see the Lord or feel his presence as he arrives, remains, departs, and enjoys. But those see who possess the inner eye of wisdom, the Jnana Chakshushaha. Na asat vijite bhavo na bhavo vijite sataha. Ubayor api drishtantos to anayos tattvadarshibhi. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. The unreal never exists. The real never ceases to be. The truth about both of these has been known by the seers. For the seers have realized Brahman. There shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. And may that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Yes, and Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Eva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Guru Sakshi Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. The Guru is one, the Guru is the witness of all, and the Guru is manifested through Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the great Trinity. So our salutations ever be to the Guru. And I say this on the auspicious day of Guru Purnima, wherein we will be, after this class with all of you, offering garlands to Sri Ramakrishna and also some prasad food, engaging in some meditation, probably on some of the teachings we'll find here in the class today, or we'll reflect back on what we learned. Because last week, as you remember, in class 1 of this series, we were looking at some of the more apparent things that the East can remind us about. That is, the Western mind, as you know by this subtitle there, what the Western mind can learn from the ancient East. And I was saying last week that sometimes it could be a little surprising when the Westerner sees it. They might be expecting some great secret, some great rahasya. Basically, the secret is of the field of everything, like Sri Krishna teaches in the Gita. That's why I started out chanting 2 Gita chants. And that great secret that he talks about in there is pretty much about the field and its knower. And we look at these things in which the Western mind has to be reminded of, and we see that these things are part of the external field. And probably, if we want to put it succinctly or make a kind of conclusion for the overall thing, is that we know, along with the Western mind knows along with the Eastern mind, the Eastern philosophy, that there are 5 elements and there are 5 senses. And we looked at those last week and how they connect to something that the West isn't so up on, and that's the prana, or the life force. It's apparent in everything, in the movement and the animation of everything. And it also has a source deeper than itself too, because it's not sentient and intelligent. It flows at the behest of another force. And it's like the spider web spun out of the spider, it's like the prana, but the spider is that Mahashakti, or that divine being, or that Shakti power who holds everything, Shaktiman, within her. And then prana itself animates everything, and everything begins to shine, like we often say, na tatra suryabhati, na chandra tarakam. The sun shines, the moon shines, but they shine by a different light. They have their moment of glory, but that light that shines behind them and causes them to light up and be illumined is that radiant sun of wisdom or consciousness. And it's the same with the human being and the five senses, because we looked at those last week. You probably can remember the chariot chart that I showed. We had the five elements outside connected to the five knowledge senses, connected to the reins of prana, connected to the chariot car of the mind. And so I think this begins to broach the subject of what we might remember is that if you're on the field and you're without a guide, or you have lost your reins and the horses are running away, then that would be a very succinct way of the Eastern philosophy telling the Western mind about yoga and how you may know about the five senses and the five elements, but we don't see you controlling them very well. So first you come to know them in their order, and then you learn those methods by which to detach from them. Because if you're too attached, the signs of that are going to be obsession with them, hoarding of wealth, and seeking of pleasure. So those are things that yoga would ask of the aspirant to implement into the knowledge of the 24 cosmic principles. I think probably some of those that we looked at last week. So after one learns to detach the senses from the objects, from the five elements and so forth, and then, so is that it? Now I can just live a peaceful life. But beyond a peaceful life or a contented life, which is hopefully one of depth, then one's going to have to go a little bit deeper with those knowledge of prana, or life force, and in that way begin to connect back to something that's of a subtler field, not just the outer prakriti, but the inner prakriti, as Krishna again tells in the Gita. So that's the second step of this process, to learn more from the Eastern philosophy, is first detach and then connect and master the process of involution, because evolution has taken over everything, and that's going to leave you high and dry, up the creek without a paddle, sometimes the expression said, and you're not going to be able to find your way home. And that's been a complaint ever since the 60s. There were songs that were sung in the 60s where people were complaining about not being able to find their way home, and they were lost in various things like intoxicants and alcohol and various attachment to things of nature. So when one begins to seek peace of mind, which you need first and foremost, here on Guru Purnima, we also salute Sri Sharda Devi, who's our guru of our guru. And she was always giving those teachings that you must seek peace of mind first and foremost. So in order to do that, then we have to know where to find it and how to get to it. So that's kind of a quick summation of last week's class, and also another description of this title that we're into. The Sanskrit word for it is adi, original, daiva, divine, vidya, knowledge. And so that's why I chanted na sat vidyate, bhavo na bhavo vidyate sataha, that they know the difference between the avidya and the vidya, between the unreal or the changing and the real and the unchanging. And then they've gotten that by tattva darshinaha. Darshinvihi, actually the Sanskrit says. So darshan means they've had darshan with those principles. So unlike then the Western mind that is not having darshan with the five elements, or the gods of the five elements, or the gods of the five senses, they're just running rampant and storing up, amassing wealth, even at the cost of violence and other peoples in the world. So that's not what we would say would be a good way of having darshan. The deities will get angry, and the deities of nature will get angry too if you pollute it, if you pollute their waters, their earth, and so forth. So that doesn't take a lot of intelligence to figure that out, but it's going to take a lot of self-effort to back the process up, turn, and look within to the original. So when they had tattva darshibihi, they had darshan with all the tattvas. One of those tattvas was the self, if uh, we could call it a tattva, because sometimes they do. It's a divine principle. That's the self within called the Purusha in old times. You saw that chart last week, Krishna on the chariot with Arjuna on the battlefield. All of those things that we were looking at in this chart that we're studying were connected back to the Purusha. And all around the Purusha was unmanifested Prakriti, all the potential for everything, which isn't tasted, touched, seen, heard, and smell, except maybe in a dream. And then it comes out into the waking state and it's experienced as gross tattvas. And then one becomes involved with the gross tattvas and forgets their subtle origins. So this is the predicament, at least the first few stages of the predicament, that are going to have to be reversed so that we can have peace of mind again. And then we can live a divine life amidst each other, even here in the physical loka, which is not all that well known for peacefulness and contentment. There's a lot to deal with here, as many of us know. So all of that, again, an introduction to what we were saying last week, and a way of going on. So this chart that was created, we're sort of following it right on down the line. And so might as well repeat Lord Vishnu's teachings on that. Brahma and the Devas speak of emancipation as resulting from the knowledge of God's nature. Some say that this nature consists of 24 principles. Others say that it consists of 36. But I will give it out here as being of 96 tattvas. And that's, of course, the boar incarnation, Lord Varaha. And this is taken from the Varaha Upanisad. If you're in good memory, then you'll remember that last week I read the whole first chapter of that. And in that were recounted all the 96 tattvas or cosmic principles. So we looked at it, just to move on quickly, we looked at the five senses first. You can see them in the other upper left-hand corner. So I'm asking you, these are words and so forth, but I'm asking you to think of them as subtle principles or even thoughts coming from intelligence. That's why these waterfalls are coming out of these open windows in space. And that space that you're to look at means your inner space, the inner ethers. All the kingdoms of heaven are within you. So these great tattvas have their origin in the inner space. Just like when you go from waking to dream state, you drop the outer objects and you take on the inner objects in dream state, right? And then when you go from waking to dream state, you also drop the outer senses and take on your dream senses. So this is all the proof really is needed that there's more than just a physical location outwardly and a physical body and five senses to experience it. To experience the origins of them, you're going to have to step back in, and that's going to take some contemplation of the order of things and some meditation on them. 2 weeks ago, we had a seminar on that very subject, how Jnana Yoga, this adhidaivavidya, is best paired up with mantra and meditation. If you have those three yogas, Jnana Yoga, Mantra Yoga, and the yoga of mantra, then you'll begin to understand the meaning of words. And like I said, then when I say the five senses, you won't just think tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, and smelling. You'll think, then I'm being asked to give those up. Like when you go to sleep, you give them up. But when you consciously give them up is when you try and meditate, right? Because you shut your eyes, you try not to hear things, you forget about dinner in a couple hours with your taste buds. So you're shutting off all the five senses. And the sense of feel also, you're supposed to be very quiet and peaceful and not think about anything that has to do with the outer senses and the outer elements at all. So this, again, makes a lot of sense, and one just has to practice it. at satsang yesterday morning, someone said, well, I tried to do that. I tried to do this process and I was trying to hear Om, but I just couldn't do it. So it's, one attempt is probably not going to do it. In fact, I used an example yesterday, if you remember, of waking up straight out of deep sleep, right into the waking state. Sometimes you bypass the dreaming state. That's why you don't remember your dreams. It's not just that, oh, I don't have any dreams anymore. Sometimes you're just in deep sleep and then something in the outer world, a sound or some moment for awakening, physically speaking, all of a sudden happens and you're straight out of deep sleep into waking. If you're very conscious, when you come out of deep sleep straight into waking in an instant like that, you'll hear the sound of Om rushing away. And this is why when you're falling asleep, they want you to do the mantra and remain conscious of God as you fall asleep, because you'll hear the reverse happen then. The sound of Om will begin to rush and take over you. And this is exactly, in a more elevated state, what Holy Mother said about the wave of light coming upon her. That's might as well be the Shabda Brahma, which she talked about, the Nada Brahma, the sound Brahman coming like light across the ground. This is like across the physical ground that she was standing on and overwhelming her. And she said she was intoxicated for days on end. So this is why to become aware of a ground of existence, as Meister Eckhart used to call it in the Christian tradition, or an underlying substratum. Other philosophers have called it in English, Western philosophers even, is very important. But just becoming aware of it, again, is not going to be the highest and deepest thing. You're going to want to know what it is and what it connects to. So last week we connected the five senses to the five elements to the five senses, and the five senses into the prana, right? You remember that in that chart. And he also, that is Lord Vishnu in the form of Varaha, also mentioned these, and you can see again the graph here. 24 is here. If you add 12 more, that's 36. And then if you add the other 50 that he says in chapter 1, I mean, he does this all in the first chapter of a 4-chapter Upanishad. So it's obvious he says, well, let's just review this. So in India, it's like, oh, let's make sure we know the adhidaivavidya, you know, and there's 96 things. I'm sure there's more than 96. I've thought of a few myself that would nice to be added in this list. But he wants everyone to sort of be on the same page with him, because as you can see by life today, people are not thinking about these things. They're not walking around thinking about the five elements. They're just enjoying a combination of them. The five senses dance before their eyes in various combinations, like wind blowing the trees or sun rising in the air. These are a combination of several elements that people get hypnotized by, and then they don't actually, or let's put it this way, they forget to actually understand what it is they're seeing, touching, tasting, hearing, and smelling. And it's just given away to the outer senses. So this is why we want to go more toward the inner senses, which are coming up. And in order to do that, the order that he does this in is very interesting. He's going to give us these 5 organs of action, because he first gave us the 5 senses, and those are the 5 organs of knowledge. So there's a pecking order here that's informing us that these 5 senses that we use so much are divine. There's and one way to say that, anthropomorphically anyway, is that they have a deity behind them. There's a god of the eyes, there's a god of the ears, there's a god of the nose, a god of the tongue, like the goddess of the tongue, you might say, the goddess of speech. You hear about her all along, goddess of wisdom and so forth. But let's not jump too far ahead, because those same gods and goddesses were in the 5 elements before the 5 senses began to take responsibility for them. So there's also a god of water, a god of earth, god of fire, god of air, and god of space. And you won't find any of these if your mind is not awakened to the fact that these deities are within. And what what the senses and elements represent are outside. From the internal, the external has come, the Upanishads say. Purnamadaha, Purnamidam, Purnamadachite. So we know that if you go back far enough, the thought of everything will have to be expressed through some mediums, and the senses are very powerful mediums for its thought to be expressed through. I'm going to see this, and you open your eyes. I don't want to hear that. Now I do. Now you've opened your ears. So there's a consciousness that's operating the senses that can be called upon to focus. And this is kind of my point when I started off my preamble today, is that because we're not focusing on it, we've lost our senses and their real function. And so now they're wondering about, the senses are wondering about. See, it reminds me of this beautiful song, basically. Mono chalo nija liketane, mono chalo nija liketane, shamshara videshe videshirveshe brahmo kino akarane, mono chalo nija liketane. So basically what this Yojanas Prakrashi, Bengali divine songwriter, is saying to us is that, oh mind, and senses are beginning to wander outward, and now you find that you have no home. So mono chalo nija nikitane means return to your own abode. So when Vivekananda was born as Narendranath, Lord of Men, his parents called him, and he met Sri Ramakrishna for the first time, he sang him this song, because he was a very good singer of divine hymns. So they say that the first song that Swamiji Vivekananda Narendranath sang for Sri Ramakrishna when they met was this song, O mind, return to your own abode, because that's exactly what had happened when Narendranath found Sri Ramakrishna at Dakaneshwar Kali Temple and saw him as the great guru, saw him as the avatar of the age, actually. So the song goes on and says, don't you know that you're a foreigner in this foreign land? Why do you roam about aimlessly with no real purpose to your life? The five senses and the five elements, this is where now all of a sudden you understand where we are in this. The five senses and the five elements, all these are different from you. Why have you become senseless in your attachment to objects and forgotten your true nature? O mind, return to your own abode. So in just a few simple lines, right away, the subject is broached and the teachings are there. See, why have you become senseless? So usually we think of the word senseless as somebody mad. They've lost their senses, mean they've just lost everything. They've lost their concentration, they've gone crazy. But here the word senseless means you've lost the real meaning of your senses, and now they're roaming out, and the mind is allowing them to roam out, like horses without reins, that chariot chart we saw. And now people are just mixing their senses with the five elements indiscriminately. The man who sang this song is called Vivekananda, the bliss of discrimination. So this is the chaos of non-discrimination that people get into when the senses are allowed to roam aimlessly. And that's because, if you want to put it philosophically, the reins have snapped. See, the reins weren't held very tight. they were either lost or dropped by the charioteer, or they just weren't made of strong stuff, so they just snapped. And now each horse wants to take its own road. That is, the horse of sight wants to go one way, the horse of taste another, the horse of hearing another. And then the chariot's thrown into disarray and crashes, just like your car crashes on the freeways. So that's what reminds me of this whole teaching is this beautiful song that Vivekananda came to Sri Ramakrishna. And here on Guru Purnima, isn't it a good time to call it forth? And how much it pertains to our chart here. Right away, the five senses and the five elements, they are not you, basically. You are the Atman. You are consciousness itself. You're the controller of the five elements and senses. You're the author of nature. And therefore, you've authored these 24 cosmic principles, or 36 or 96, and you've let them go to seed, like in a garden. You've let the garden go to seed. No weeding is being done. No crops are being grown. No nutrition is being had. So this accents the point very well. So to look into the list further as we make these connections, let's look at where we find the five organs of action. And of course, this is an old war horse, so we don't probably need to spend a lot of time on it. 24 cosmic principles of Sankhya philosophy are generally listed up here, but I said Lord Vishnu took a little bit different license here and listed some later, like the five gross elements are usually put there. And you can see in this chart here, the five gross elements are right here at the end. They're 20 through 24. That is Vyoma, Maru, Teja, Ap, and Kshiti. Those basically in Sanskrit, so they're called the five active senses, karmendriyas. So this is the gross action is going on by speaking, acting, moving, procreation, and elimination. Those are the five active senses that you can put down into a list. And if you were to go and connect them across the board to the five active senses, the five, that is air, earth, water, fire, air, and ether in order from gross to subtle, and you could put them across the board with the five active senses of as I just said, excretion, procreation, locomotion, handling, and speaking. And then, of course, the cognitive senses that we're talking about are there too. So smell, taste, form, touch, sound. The indriyas are called. Basically, Granendriya, Rasendriya, Chakshur Indriya. I just chanted that word in Krishna's chant. The Jnana Chakshur, the eye of wisdom, that's going to be something that's, of course, far beyond this, just the eye of the two eyes. That's an inner eye, they call it. And Sparshendriya, that's this, Sparsha is to feel. Shravana, you know how that is. To hear the truth would be like Shravana. So remember that in the terms of Shravana and Manana and Nididhasanam, these three great proofs of truth, we call them. First, you hear a guru say the truth on Guru Purnima, for instance, and then you meditate on it, and then you realize it. It becomes a part of your realization again. So this is what we want to do with this. We want to make sure this is all a part of our realization. There's no doubts here, that there's no gaps in our cosmic process, because it is, after all, the adhidaivavidya. It's the original divine knowledge. So it's 24 cosmic principles of Samkhya. If you go into Samkhya, well, that's way back with Lord Kapila. And it's before Krishna was on the battlefield, because he said in the Gita, Lord Kapila, of sages, I am Lord Kapila. So we know that Lord Kapila then lived prior to Sri Krishna's time, which was a long time ago. So you see that Samkhya Yoga goes way back in this way, in this sense. But so with the five organs of action, and the five elements, and we've jumped ahead a little bit to the five gross elements. You can see all of these listed right here. Now, what he talks about next, so we can move on, is the five vital airs. And those, again, I was so happy to find out that there were the five pranas were listed in Lord Vishnu's chart. But Upanishad, but if you want to look at them specifically, we can come back to the 24 cosmic principles later, but that was just a chart that helps us see the gross elements connected to the gross senses, connected to the subtle senses. Now we have to connect them to, if there are gross senses and subtle senses, we have to connect them to the gross elements, to the subtle elements, right? And then we have to know, and that's coming, I'll show you the tanmatras, but what we also have to begin to know what connects them. So at this point, people are thinking, this adhidaivavidya is a lot to memorize, and connect, and a lot to control. I've lost control of certain senses. People are always complaining about this. I've got control of one of the passions or two of the passions, but there's one passion that really gets me. You see, like greed or lust or anger. So you could have a person that's really not angry very much at all, but he's got a real problem with the other five passions. There are six passions. It might as well be a list on here too. So in that case, then you find people that have this difficulty, and so you hear them saying, how do I then remedy this problem with not having control of myself, aspects of my own self? And so the first thing that people from the East would try and give them is meditation. Probably not the best idea. The second thing they'll try to give them, which is a better idea, is pranayama, how to control the breath. So they'll get the idea in some quarters, like particularly Buddhist quarters, it's control the breath. Yoga, control the breath, and Tantra, and in Zen, it's watch the breath. And so you have these various teachings that come with the different religious traditions that want you to focus on the breath, but probably what they're not telling you, and hopefully you'll find a teacher who will tell you this, once you've evened out the breath in yoga, the in breath, the held breath, and the out breath, that's called puraka, kumbhaka, and rechaka. Then once you've controlled that, and then you even it out, and you make sure that you use that even breath for everything you do, think, taste, touch, and smell. You apply it back to all the five elements and the five senses and the subtle senses. And then you find out that, oh, guess what? I'm now able to control my passions. I'm now able to get free of my fetters. There are 6 passions and 8 fetters in the tradition we hear about. And so all of a sudden, with the breathing exercise given to them, if they practice it faithfully and for a few months with a good teacher, then they find out that these things get removed from their arena of problems that they're brooding about and they're worrying about. And all of a sudden they have a mastery of their breath. So that's part of mastering the body and senses, is to master the breath. So quite often, if it's very difficult for people to remove a habit that's already ingrained in them, then they can just take the mind off of that habit and put it on breathing. It can happen with some people of higher intelligence. Take the mind off the habit, put it on meditation. That can also help. It can also happen, take the mind off of that bad habit and put it on chanting the names of the Lord, and that might help. Mantra yoga, devotion to God. So these yogas that come forward, and probably you could also say, don't think about it, just work without selfish motive. So that's karma yoga. See, the karmendriyas can be controlled by karma yoga too. So all of these are methods from the seers that have given us the adhidaivavidya. They make you aware of all these 24, 32, 96 principles, and then they say, oh, you're having a problem with a few of them, or you're not conscious of a few of them. You want to make more connections. There's some gaps in your process, like Father of Yoga will tell you, gaps in the thinking process, gaps in your meditation where your consciousness falls out and all of a sudden you wake up again. Chanchala vritti, it's called. So there are different vibrations that come along that distract and even take away your consciousness. So so if you find that there's certain areas of your consciousness that aren't obeying you as the masters, the senses should be controlled by the master of the senses, like Krishna's controlling the chariot for Arjuna, then this practice will help you. And this practice cannot be effective unless you know what it is you're practicing to attain, and you know the elements that have gotten out of control. Back to Tattva Darshana. If I want to have darshan with things, I have to know what they are, where they are, how they connect, and put my consciousness on them. So with the prana, that's one of my happy discoveries with the Varaha Upanisad that we got this chart out of. Basically, is that Lord Vishnu puts the five pranas in right away. And I've never seen that happen to other systems. I haven't seen it present. Maybe later. And I think this is part of the reason why, as Vivekananda said, we don't know about the prana, and we don't know about the psychic prana, and we don't know about the tanmatras either, the subtle elements. So this is why we're going right down this list to make sure that we remember these things, because they are a part of us. They're a part of everyone, East or West. This is the original divine knowledge out of which, whom I chanted to this morning, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva, out of the Trinity, these things came and were given to us and imprinted in our soul. Divine Mother herself made sure that we had these. That's why we enjoy them here. But if we're running afoul of that enjoyment, we're suffering now. Like if the God, to put it again anthropomorphically, if you're not treating the gods of air, earth, water, fire, and ether, and the gods of seeing, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling with tenderness and care, and keeping the connections with them back to your own divine nature, then that's where this whole thing gets out of balance. That's opposite of yoga. See? So you want to keep everything in balance in yoga and not let it get out of balance and hold on to that. And again, a difficult task in a day and age where people seem to favor this imbalance. See? They'd almost rather be out of balance than in balance. In balance, oh, that's too peaceful. I'm not happy with that. I want to be restless. I want to sleep. Don't wake me up. But that rajas and tamas is where suffering and karmas come back inside of that. In sattva, those get waylaid. In pure sattva, they get destroyed. So depending on which guna of your mind is predominant, slothfulness, restlessness, or balance, then if you work towards balance, then you can have a possibility of transcending all three gunas. Trigunatita is called in the tradition. So if we look at this chart on prana then, you can see that, as Vivekananda said, it's the singular prana in 5 forms. And that's the first time I ever heard that. In the teachings, like say Hatha Yoga will get a hold of prana and breathing exercises. And they'll pretty much teach about balancing the 3 kinds of breath and all of that as a kind of exercise for the lungs. As if we really want to turn our lungs into a pair of bellows. We want to actually understand what the life force is all about, because it's connecting all of these elements, and some of them we've forgotten about. We should be able to go back into meditation. We should even be able to go back into dreaming and deep sleep. And all of everything that we see, taste, touch, and smell through the prana with our subtle senses in the subtle realm of the subtle elements called heavens will be recognizable to us. We'll remember it. We'll know where we are. Yep, this is the dreaming state. It's the same as the waking state, but just full of subtle things. And that's how Gaudapada describes it in his Karika. It's really not that much difference between the waking and the dreaming state. That is Chakrat and Swapna. It's in Sushupti that the differences come. Deep sleep, that's where everything goes away. So I'm kind of interested in, Sushupti, how I went into Nidra Samadhi, where, the sleep samadhi, where everything went away, but I was still there. So before I was in dreaming and waking and everything was present, but I wasn't there. The things themselves became me and I wasn't them. I was them, right? And I wasn't myself. So you can turn all of this back on itself and say, well, when I was in the waking state, like I was just describing, people go out and they attach the objects. So I'm not myself anymore. I'm the objects. So I better go and say, Mano chalo ninja niketane. I better sing a couple songs to convince myself the five elements and the five senses are not yours. They're not you, you see. And therefore I can find out who I am, because when I withdraw from them, there's somebody doing the withdrawing and there's some place to withdraw to. That's what meditation is for. And there's also a God of meditation that you can meditate on, called Ishvara, or Guru. On Guru Purnima, it's good to bring that up. So you put it in that way as a way of understanding it. When I'm in dreaming, then the dream objects get me, right? Now I'm the dream. I'm not the dreamer. So in each one of these states, you're losing yourself because of objects and senses. So isn't this enough to convince you that you want to master objects and senses? In other words, you want to master waking and dreaming states, right? What's waking? What's a letter for waking? A. What's a letter for dreaming? And what's the letter for deep sleep? And that's Om, that spells Om. So each of the mantras of Om spell the three states of our consciousness. That's coming up here, the three states of our consciousness. That's very important teaching in the adhidaivavidya. So we're getting deeper and deeper with these teachings. That's the point, you see. On the surface here, I'm saying that we don't even know the surface yet. It's like if you're a surfer and you go out in a windy day, you should probably know that the ripples are going to knock you around and the riptides are going to carry you down the shore. But if you don't know this, then you're surprised and taken aback by all the currents, and you get carried away and you don't have a very good time surfing. So you're probably going to want to smooth out those ripples of inner sailing and go inward at just the right time in order to have that smooth sailing or smooth surfing. So as metaphorically, you could say that. So one of the ways to do this then is to make the prana less ragged. One way of putting it. I see people who are angry or vicious or violent, their prana is really ragged. And they're not even trying to hide it, are they? Just say, I'm going to kill you, or my army is going to take over your country. Get ready. Either submit or we'll destroy you. So this is a very ragged form of this outer prana that people are evincing. It's just coming out of them like a bad vibration. And then you see people who are more controlled, and then you see people who are actually meditative. So the gunas are changing, as we said. The gunas will also be taken up in this adhidaivavidya, the three gunas, and so people are becoming more and more refined. Their consciousness is reaching higher levels, more intelligent levels. The less intelligent are always violent. The more intelligent are always knowledgeable. That's direct rule. So how to then deal with this ragged prana? See, so this chart is like that. You can see that there are 5 kinds of prana. It's really one prana. You can see him there, the god of prana, with these 5 goddesses around him, which represent the 5 kinds of prana. And we can uh, we can take this beautiful saying from the Prajna Upanishad. It's one of the few Upanishads that really do talk deeply about the prana. The rishi was asked, how many gods support creatures and who's the greatest among them? Remember, I was just talking about gods. So we're not talking about just some pantheon somewhere floating up in the heavens. We're talking about gods of our own being. The god of seeing, the god of hearing. These rishis, this rishi is saying this with the god of speech, and the rishis around him are, students around him are listening to him with the god of hearing. You have to take this literally, or else the wisdom just goes over your head. You don't get it. So the, the gods are realities because your senses are real. If the gods weren't there, the eyes wouldn't see, ear wouldn't hear, you wouldn't feel the touch. And there are people who are actually seeing and not seeing, and hearing and not hearing, because the gods have abandoned them, because the gods aren't being treated right by these worldly people, by these vicious people. So they don't really have subtle senses at all. So I'm just saying, reminding you this, they're asking him, who are the best gods? Who's the best god among them? And the rishi said, ether is that god. Air, fire, water, earth, mind, and senses are those gods. These standing forth manifest their power and declared, we alone hold the body, we alone support it. But then Prana, the god of Prana, stood up and declared, don't be deluded. I alone, dividing myself into 5 parts, hold and support the body. But none of those other gods, that is what, water, earth, air, senses, they weren't inclined to believe him. They didn't believe him when he stood up and said that. So he had to prove it. He said, so he abandoned the body, and as he went out, so did all the other gods. So the eyes couldn't see without the prana. The nose could not smell without the prana. The mind could not think without the prana, and that's called psychic prana. Another thing Vivekananda said we had to rediscover from the adhidaivavidya. There's such a thing as subtle elements, and there's such a thing as psychic prana. And that connects us back to the more important adhidaivavidya, that of the mind. Like I say, we're going through the outer prakriti now, and we're starting to get to the inner prakriti because India knows there are 2 kinds of prakriti. So he abandoned the body, and as he went out, so did all the others. Just as bees leave the hive when the queen does, so did speech, mind, eye, ear, etc., etc. And all others depart when prana departed. So when he came back, they all praised him. He said, oh, please get back into the body so I can see great things again, so I can hear wonderful things again, so I can taste good food again. Please, prana, come back. Without you, the body's nothing. See, so here's how important the prana is, which is why I've always said I really would have loved to have seen it in Lord Copula's list, pronounced more, and in other Upanishads. But when I looked in the Taittiriya Upanishad and the Prajna Upanishad, there I found some really good teachings, and I knew it was always had been there in the adhidaivavidya, if not actually mentioned, at least inferred. And here's another quote from the Upanishads that's very, of the Atman is born this prana. So if you want to know where the prana has its origin, we found out that last week, remember the reins going from the horses connected back to, the prana connected back to the mind, the hub. So, we're to think the prana came out of the mind, you see. But sometimes the mind doesn't think. Where'd the prana go? Like the mind went into deep sleep. Where'd the prana go? So the prana must have some origin too, some place where it retreats, like when the yogi becomes breathless, for instance, or when you go into deep sleep, the prana leaves everything. In fact, one Upanishad says, it's like a hawk in its nest at night. When everything else sleeps, it remains awake in its nest, the hawk. So like Kagavad and Avadhut teaching. So basically, prana will go back and rest and watch everything while everything else sleeps. So this is what the gods found out too. If it's, if it leaves, then there's nothing going on, no connections being made. The spider has left the web, it's like Elvis has left the house only on a spiritual level. Um, so that's a beautiful thing. We found out then in one of the Upanishad where the prana comes out from the Atman. That's a very close connection to divinity. Like a shadow, it is spread out on that. It comes into the body by the act of the mind. So the mind is uh, is uh, a place through which the prana will pass in order to get to the body. The lungs. So you say mind, lungs. So if we're going to reverse this process, we're going to take the prana back to our lungs. We're going to breathe consciously. We're going to connect it to Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. We're going to connect it to AUM. We're going to connect it to the held breath, the in-breath, and the out-breath. All the time remembering that it's got its connection back in the Atman. So much easier to think of energy as having a source in the object, in the Atman, than these. See, they don't seem like Atman at all, not unless you can find the deity of them. But prana seems like something very powerful that can connect to the Atman. And so the worlds worship it without knowing what it is. The ancestors love it. When they die and come back, they use it. That's really what everyone wants when they seek wealth, when they seek great foods, and when they seek pleasures. It's the prana that they're seeking, not the things themselves. And that person who finds out that it's the prana becomes a yogi, or a yogini. Oh, I see the prana is responsible for my attraction to that. Why don't I just worship the god of prana in 5 forms? You see. So what are those 5 forms? Basically, they're prana, samana, apana, vyana, and udana. Not hard to memorize because they all rhyme so nicely. So you can see them there in the triangle form with udana at the top. But because if you're coming from the inside out, udana connects to the ether. And then you can see how another prana will connect to water, how another will connect to fire, and another to earth, and another to air. So here's the adhidaivavidya coming back at us again, is that you can't just have a bunch of teachings thrown out there in India and expect everything to work out. These were pre-thought. They were preconceived. They were premeditated by rishis who had explored all the aspects of their being. Should we go back and read it? The rishis, Brahma and the Devas speak of emancipation as resulting from the knowledge of God's nature. So they took God as their meditation, Brahman. And then Brahman came forward in a form of a rishi or a great soul, an avatar, and said, here's what I consist of. And that's what we're looking at here. It's the Varaha Upanisad, the first chapter of which the avatar came forward and told them all, well, here, I can give you 96 cosmic principles. I know you're used to 24. That's good. Glad you know those. And, 32, some of you went further. But I can tell you how to connect all 92 and more back to Brahman. But if Brahman goes away, it's just like prana going away. You see, everything will fall flat, won't it? Even the prana itself will lose itself. Because prana, as I just said, is not intelligent. It's not sentient. That's where we make the distinction between a life force that moves and consciousness itself, which is all pervasive and stable and doesn't move. So the field and its knower, I said earlier today, right? There's kshetra and there's kshetragya. Tragya, kya means jnanam. So there's a knower of that field of principles. And take that away and all the rest falls flat. So let's take this world, for instance. Knowledge of God has gone away. So the world is falling flat. It's not satisfying us anymore. Some of us because we're deluded. Others because we realize that that Brahman cannot be elements. Brahman cannot be senses. Brahman cannot be thoughts. Upanishads told us earlier, it's not thought, energy, or matter, right? So those three things put us automatically in the presence of Brahman. If we could just look at those three things and say, neti neti, we might have to do neti neti with 24 principles or 92 principles if you really want to find the stable Brahman. But why can't you do it with just three concepts? It's not thought, it's not energy, and it's not matter. And this is what the Svetashvatara Upanishad and that great rishi in it told us. It's a real cut to the chase kind of thing. But you're going to have to be somewhat apt and able to be able to do that. So anyway, a quick introduction here about the five pranas. The rest of the chart is everything that can come out of them if you take them up to their components. Again, the five elements, and then some of these, the divine powers in the Akasha and the gods are listed inferred in some of these. Not only that, the four Vedas and the ashrama is listed here at the top. And mind, will, thought, sadhana, mantra, and food, all coming out of this connection. What that prana will lead to once we get it under our control and use it like Garuda to fly inward. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is from Varaha, right? And Varaha is a form of who? Vishnu, we said. What's Vishnu's mount? Prana. It's Garuda. Garuda, Vishnu rides the Garuda bird. You've seen him on the dragon bird, as it were. So Garuda is that represents prana. So Vishnu moves about the seven worlds and the three worlds through prana. And we'll look at a finer form of prana. Maybe we should do that now because we can keep moving along here along this list. So let's look at it now that we've kind of, let's see if this is, let's read Swami Vivekananda's quote before. And just to make it clear, prana at the physical level is inhalation and digestion, ingestion, and then not indigestion, but ingestion. Prana, apana, the second form is exhalation and excretion, everything that goes out. So you think everything that comes in and everything that goes out on these different levels is due to two forms of this prana. Samana is digestion, that is absorption of everything, and it's distribution. So you don't have to think about that, right? You eat and all the nutrients get distributed to the various organs carried by the blood and so forth. The blood is just like the little brother of prana. You see, carries things, different people, nutrients and so forth. And so that's just happening. Again, these are things known to all, but we're not connecting them to their sources. So they're not very deeply known by all. Some will know at surface, but some won't know it at all. And what's the determining factor there? If I'm peaceful and balanced or not. If I'm not, I don't know it. If I am, I do know it. So you can give yourself some credit for having mastered some of this darshana, Vedanta, for instance, by hearing it, Ravana, through the sense of your hearing and making sense out of it and accepting it, and then meditating on it. And then you have the upward rising prana. I mentioned that here. The yogis like this very much. They like to get a hold of udana, and because that causes their thoughts to rise. So if you're laying in Brahma Muhurta about 4 a.m, and your mind is just coming out of sleep, and so what should I do now? Shall I get up? It's so early. Maybe I'll go back to sleep. But you can get a hold of this udana and just start using it to think about the divine. And all of a sudden, you look at the clock an hour later, it's 5 o'clock or 6, it's gone by, and your mind has been just engaged with divine things. So you had sort of like yesterday at satsang, I said, it might be that God doesn't love us so well because we have to love God first. You see, I had that idea in my head yesterday at satsang. I said, well, where is God? Why doesn't he love me? People ask me that all the way. Well, try loving God first and see how much he loves you when he comes. And make that love unconditional. Don't make that love a matter of fear or a matter of suffering. Please remove my suffering, so forth. Just love God unconditionally, and then see how you feel later about uh, that relationship with the divine. So anyway, I was on that, and how the udana is a kind of prana that you can get a hold of. And it's very much connected to like the in-breath. And then the mind can be elevated. Sri Krishna used to call that hot air balloon story. You see, that's, you just take the sandbags out of the basket. Oh, goodbye, everyone. Have a good trip, you see. And it's just filled with helium. It just goes up by itself. So the mind filled with the helium of udana will just go up by itself. And it will start to have communion, attva darshana, with everything that it encountered over the last 6 hours, from 10 p.m. when you went to bed to 4 in the morning. You encountered all those things, but you did it without knowing them. Now with the udana, you're going back to those same period of 6 hours you just went through, but with your consciousness turned on. You see what I mean? If your consciousness is turned on to these things, then and the divine is present in you, then your waking and dreaming states might as well be conscious. Consciousness is your best friend. Why are you abandoning it? Oh, mind, go back to your true abode, we were just singing. Hold that, most precious, and hold that as you would hold the prana, like you'd hold the breath and let it out. So Shankara says, when I breathe in, I say, I am Brahman. When I hold the breath, I say, I will always be Brahman. And when I let it out, I'm not the world. Why are you roaming about, attached to the 5 senses and the 5 elements? They're not you. So you could put it, in terms of an Upanishad, or you could put it in terms of a song that somebody's singing to help convince the mind that this is what you should be doing every minute of your day, every second, every breath, and certainly every day of your life. I didn't get very far in that quote, did I? But all the forces that are in the universe resolve back into the prana. This is Swami Vivekananda. In the next cycle, out of this prana evolves everything that we call energy, everything that we call force. It is prana that is manifesting as motion. It is prana that is manifesting as gravitation, as magnetism. It is the prana that is manifesting as the actions of the body, as the nerve currents, as the thought force. How about that for building a good tier of things that the prana is responsible for? From thought down to the lowest force, then, everything is but the manifestation of prana. And I say it again, I say it often, man does not live by bread alone. So I think that since it's pretty obvious that we don't live by God, because God's eternal life, it's not embodied life, we're fortunate if this body can be used in the service of God. It doesn't have to be a cage of bones and flesh. Somebody wrote that to me the other day. Oh, the body's just a cage of bones and flesh. I say, yeah, Sri Krishna said that. But you also have 3 bodies. And the body is also how the avatar works to help people through. So the body is very important to the adhidaivavidya. Otherwise, they wouldn't be including it in the original knowledge, would they? So we again treat the body as a god, as a goddess. So anyway, that's kind of what's being said here. That everything is a manifestation of the prana. So if man does not live by bread alone, or does not live by God, but is God, becomes God, or then you could say that the bread is not going to keep you alive alone very long. And in fact, you can be perfectly healthy and live a good life, and bread is just sustaining your body. That's all. It's not giving you enlightenment. So if you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but what's the next thing? Next to food, then it's the prana in food, and the prana helps the body, helps the mind think, and that thinking process can, as I said, with some of these pranas, udana in mind and conscious can get elevated, a hot air balloon up, and you can spend more time in those elevations and less time down in the gravitation. I mean, if you say, Swamiji says, manifests as gravitation, as magnetism, those are very heavy things, physically speaking. And so you're going to want to elevate the mind so that it's not attracted, magnetism, to things that aren't good for it. And it's not pulled down, gravitation, by things that are not healthy for it. So you're going to have to use that prana like a reverse pole. Magnet comes together because they have similar poles. Reverse one of them, they run away from each other. So take this one magnet called embodied existence on earth in ignorance and turn the magnet away from it called seeking God and watch the two separate. You see, just like that. They will repel each other. That's what you have to do when you're seeking God. And therefore, I'm not the body, not the senses. I'm not five elements and so forth. That's neti neti. Let's then look at prana's subtle form called psychic prana. Now, taking in mind those five pranas we just looked at, you can see them there, here around the meditator. There's apana, prana, udana going upwards again, samana going right, jhana going right, and the meditator having all those pranas at his or her beck and call. So once these pranas of exhalation, inhalation, assimilation, pervasion, and inspiration, as they're calling the prana of udana, and inspiring forces, I was just describing it. Once all of these are utilized, then they have to connect to something too. So that's the adhidaivavidya tradition. It's all got to connect. And because we're going to want to make the ultimate connection that everything is Brahman. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to step in from gross to subtle to causal to beyond, or from tamas to rajas, sattva to pure sattva to trigunatita, beyond the gunas. Everything is heading for this culmination, which quite often nowadays we're calling now involution, in order to bring the idea of involution back to our source in a world that's sort of has lost that idea because evolution has become the only focus. And we're not earth, and we're not bodies, and we're not animals. We never were. So the soul has gotten trapped in this idea of being gross, and but it still has dreaming going on. It still has deep sleep going on. It still has inspiration happening, and it still has intellect going on, intelligence going on, despite all of those downsides of relativity. So if we want to connect this, then there are psychic forms of prana that are important to look at. So if you want to say apana is exhalation, then it would connect to psychic apana, which is the ability to expel negativities. You see how important this becomes then if I'm just basically following a regimen of pranayama. I inhale, I hold, I exhale. So, okay, that's good. But advaitically, you just heard from Shankara that when you exhale, you say, I'm not the world. So he must be wanting you to put your mind, your thought on the breath. Breathe in, I am Brahman. Hold the breath, I will always be Brahman. Breathe out, I'm not the world. This is where a thought connects to those principles and those problems. Because before that, I thought, I can't be Brahman. I and my father aren't one. And, I'm the two, I'm the many. God doesn't exist, so forth. So in order to rid yourself of those kinds of misfiances, misconceptions, then you're going to have to convert that. And these pranas, the psychic pranas, are going to help you to do that. I think this is just called deeper thinking, see, because you stop at basically breathing and affirmation. It's not going to do it for you because you haven't made the connection with the psychic prana yet. So here's where the psychic prana is important. It stands as a connecting force between the prana and thinking. I mean, true thinking, wisdom thinking, mother's thinking, wisdom goddess. She's standing there. I'm giving you the psychic prana now so you can reach me through the power of your own thought. And so that's going to be something that you're going to want to have before you meditate, before you get to know thought. Because Father of Yoga says when you get to know thought, there's a problem with that. It's called vacuity. Is that you have no thought and you come out of that and you say, oh, I must have had samadhi. But samadhi is not no thought. Samadhi is with objects and beyond objects. That's all. But it's with consciousness all the time. It's with awareness. It's just a matter of whether that awareness is concentrating on the lower tattvas or the higher tattvas. But its realization doesn't make either go away. It just gives you the power to withdraw from them and go deeper. So that's what psychic prana is acting as a connecting force. So here you can see psychic prana animates animates the antakarana. It expels negativities so that then the mind can think higher thoughts. Because what is it that's keeping you from thinking higher thoughts? The minute you try and think something, there's an obstacle that comes forth. That obstacle reminds you of a negativity in the mind, reminds you of brooding, and you give up the trek, the inward trek. I'll never do that, like children in school. I can't do that. They've got sort of a habit of thinking that way. And somebody didn't connect them to the psychic prana that allows them to expel their own negativities. There are some people, on the other hand, that never had a negative thought in their life, like our founder, like Sixon here. We met him and he said, well, where'd the negative thoughts go? Oh, they're just not there. He just goes around positive all the time. So we've met people like that. So that means the psychic prana is doing its job. And then you can see the psychic prana can then imbibe wisdom. Then the psychic udana can refine that wisdom. Because once you have that wisdom, then it might still be mixed a little bit with some non-wisdom, with some ignorance, with some agyan. And so they said, well, then I'm going to subject you to the psychic udana and purify you. Like the Upanishad says, take a blowtorch and just scorch the side of the hill. See, a fire jet, I think they call it. He must have had them in the Upanishadic time. So just take this fire blower and just scorch the side of the hill, and all of a sudden all the ore shows up. Now you go pick the ore and take it home and sell it, get rich. So that's what the psychic prana will do to this unrefined wisdom. It'll just purify it. It'll take all the dross out of it. Weeds, grass, rock, pure, just plain lava. It'll take all that away in one vast blast, you see. And then all the ore is standing there sparkling. So this is a metaphor for how to refine the wisdom that's has now been located inside of yourself. Because why? because you got rid of the negativities that were standing in the way. So the negativities are the first thing you're going to have to deal with. Remember mentioning our founder, Lex Hixon. What do we do now? I asked him once. He was 30 something, I was 20 something. Well, now that we have this wisdom, what do we do now? He says, inspect your mind with this new wisdom and get rid of everything that doesn't fit. That was his one instruction to me. I don't think he ever gave me another instruction. We just meditated together, shared teachings and so forth. That one thing he did tell me, just inspect your mind now with all this new wisdom you got here with Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji and Holy Mother. And just anything that stands out that needs to be getting rid of, just do that. Fire blast it, get rid of it, extract it, throw it away. And then, so back then I wasn't thinking, oh yeah, that must be the role of the psychic udana, I mean the psychic apana to do that for me. But no, it's just something that if you become aware of, then you also become aware of the fact that you have the power, that you have that prana in you, like this meditator, right? He's becoming aware of the prana. So that's one of the things that needs to happen in order to understand what he just read in the Gita before he sat down, or what he heard his guru speaking in Upanishad before he sat down. This needs to be there now, because that wisdom will be there, but it'll encounter the negativities of his karma and samskaras and fly away. That's why people stand up and leave the ashram. They feel inspired, they go away, never come back, or they come back again to try and remember what it was they just learned. It's because this power of negativity is just coming like a Mayak scum on the lake, Sri Ramakrishna said. Push it away, you can see yourself, but it comes dancing back and covers it. So you need to have that awareness that these negativities are impeding your way. And then you need to become indignant about the fact that something insentient can keep you from your own self and from the Lord, from the Mother. Nothing should be able to keep that away from you. So if I want to see the Lord, or if I want to know the Lord, or I want to be the Lord, any one of those yogas that you're practicing, then that's going to mean the negativities need to go away. That's going to be one of the first things to do. Back here, you're probably not thinking that way. I've got 5 senses. I better find the deities to them and connect to them. Well, there's 5 elements out there. I better meditate on them as alambanas. And you're going through the whole thing. But when you get to the inner sphere, the subtle realm, where the pranas operate, and because you see that people are taking the prana and making it only external. Hatha yoga is guilty of that, making it only external with external nerve endings and so forth. And Vivekananda is even like directing himself to that in that quote we just read. See, start to think of it as just having to do with nerves and nerve endings and magnetism and so forth. But now what really needs to be done then is this needs to be taken to the next level. And this is what's called an internal life, or what Christ called an eternal life. You can let go of the external things and acknowledge that there's a source to them. Go to that source and begin to drink the nectar there. This is what adhidaivavidya is doing. It's taking you back to the original divine knowledge that is our true nature. See? And then the psychic samana will digest the wisdom. So it's interesting that all the 5 pranas are doing these things for our body, and we're really not that aware of it, right? Oh, I got the food. I ate it. Now it's mine. Now I'm digesting it, you see. So it's just all happening like that. And nobody really thinks about it until they get sick or something impedes that process. Then they have to go find out what it is that got in the way. It's the same with the mind. They're not really thinking about subtle pranas operating your thoughts and how that disconnects you from certain things, like your own wisdom. That's pretty much what's being said here. You get rid of the negativities. Your own wisdom can then be taken in. Then you want to refine that wisdom. Now you want to digest it. You see, so it's just like the five pranas, only it's five subtle pranas. That's all. It's pretty easy to understand, so that this doesn't have to become a real esoteric teaching. It's esoteric right now because we're not thinking that way. And so Vivekananda came here and said, oh, I see they don't know anything about the tanmatras. They don't know anything about the psychic prana. So we don't have an internal life yet. And if we can't have an internal life of dreaming and deep sleep consciously, then we can't have an eternal life of what goes beyond them, right? What's beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep? What's the word? Turiya, the fourth state of our consciousness. Then we won't be able to reach that. Then there's the psychic jnana, which permeates thought. See, it's just like we can be sick in our body and things are not happening right. Doesn't mean that particular kind of prana, jnana, has gone away. It's always there. So there's always a ground upon which you can stand at every level of existence. Even with the five elements as a ground you can stand on and begin to take note of. But with your health and your body and so forth, and your mental health and your intellectual health and your spiritual health, it's the same way here. Is that there's all in the realm of the refined prana, psychic prana, there's a prana that's always there. And that's why we get well again after we get sick. Oh, the pranas aren't really balanced right now, and so forth. My senses aren't working right, and I'm clogged up, and my ingestion isn't working right. But that all-pervasive prana is always there, and you can always feel it. Oh, then you begin to think about it, and then all of a sudden you say, I want to be well again. See, and then that prana begins to flow, that wellness prana. So that's this all-pervasive prana. That's the psychic form of jnana prana. That is something that needed to be said so that we could satisfy Vivekananda's or respond to Vivekananda's statement that we don't yet know about the psychic prana. When we make a discovery, problem with humanity is when we make a discovery, whether it's outer space or whatever, medicine or whatever, we tend to glom onto it as if that's the last thing, and we don't go further. Well, that's what Hatha Yoga has done with the body and with asana and with prana. It's stopped there. That's not the point of it. Whole adhidaivavidya, the original divine wisdom, is to keep connecting this back, and that's where enlightenment happens. So all the Yoga Sutras and all the great souls are talking to us about moksha, about mukti, about koivalya. And other religions are talking to us about satori and asampragyata in yoga. There's a ultimate source to all this. And if we want to see it, we're going to have to connect these inner avenues. And if you think Kundalini style, the Sushumna is already connected to the seventh chakra. So it's just a matter of bringing our consciousness up it or into it, deep into it is what I would say rather, because it's not in the physical spine again. That's where Kundalini 101 yoga stopped in the West. So, we think it's in my spine somewhere. I'm going to go to the doctor and see if I can dissect it and find the Kundalini in there flowing along my bony spine. You see, it's that kind of idiocy that people think about. This is all subtle and it's all spiritual. And if you even detect the prana in your breath and then go to the psychic prana, you're already well on your way to understanding what pure conscious awareness is and finding it, and that is realizing it fully inside of yourself, because that's where it is. Sakshi Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Deva Maheshwara Gurur Eva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dandvaititam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamashadilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tanamami Om Shanti